so many of us who have had our personal information exposed. People have had pictures exposed.
When Todd Blanche mentioned that there were no other men involved, it just literally made my whole body shake.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Tuesday evening. I'm Holly Furfer, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news. From a massive Russian missile strike on Kyiv, Ukraine, to survivors of Jeffrey Epstein fighting the Justice Department. But first, we started the morning with our international correspondent in Paris, where French authorities raided the offices of the social media platform X. French prosecutors searched the offices of Elon Musk's social media platform X on Tuesday as part of a criminal investigation. Authorities are looking into alleged complicity in spreading child sexual abuse images, sexually explicit deepfakes, and Holocaust denial. Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen joins us now from Paris with more on this. And Ross, do we know what authorities were looking for in their raid and what they might have found?
Well, Holly, that raid taking place a little bit earlier on today here in the French capital. The French authorities looking into cybercrime assisted by the European Union's police agency, Europol. Now, it's all tied to an investigation that actually began in January last year over whether X's algorithm had been used to interfere in French politics. The investigation has since then been widened to look at X's artificial intelligence chatbot, Grok. We do know that the French prosecutors have announced that they have summoned Elon Musk here to Paris in April for a voluntary interview as part of this investigation, because there are also parts of the inquiry that are looking at allegations that there was the promotion of Holocaust denial content. Also, there were allegations related to data extraction and also complicity in the possession of child pornography. We know that in the past, X has characterized this specific French investigation as an attack on free speech, and we are waiting to hear, Holly, if Elon Musk will agree to coming here to Paris for that interview with Paris prosecutors.
And so, Ross, then what happens next if he decides to come, or even if he says, no, I'm not going to Paris, I'm not going to France?
Well, it's an official summons, but it would only be for a voluntary interview. So if he decides not to come here to Paris, there might be formal written evidence that the Paris prosecutors might accept, perhaps if he were to give a voluntary statement rather than appearing here in person. Certainly, we know that there are lots of issues related to X in a number of European countries. There is increasing pressure on Elon Musk's social platform in the United Kingdom, and we do see the wider impact of problems with X in the suggestions by different countries, including France and Spain, that there should be a social media ban on the use of these platforms for anyone under the age of 16 or 15. X is one of those social media platforms that would be targeted by such a ban.
And Ross, I know that some authorities have said they're no longer using X. They're going to communicate through other means like Facebook and LinkedIn. But could there be a ban of X in France and then perhaps even in other European countries?
Well, that would force a lot of European officials, including the French President Emmanuel Macron, the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. It would force these officials who continue to use X to find other means of disseminating their information, such as formal announcements, or perhaps using rival platforms such as Blue Sky or maybe LinkedIn. There has certainly been a call by several European members of Parliament for their leaders at national level to stop using X because of they feel that there has been a degradation of the content on there since Twitter became X, since Elon Musk took control of the social media platform. Certainly there are some people who would like to see X banned, but here in France, one of the words in the national slogan is liberté, liberty and freedom, and so there is always a part of the French society, whether it's politicians or the public, who want to hold those truths of freedom dear and be able to have these social media platforms available to everyone and say it is up to the person themselves to choose whether to use it.
All right, Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen live from Paris. Thank you for the update, Ross. We appreciate it. And President Trump is demanding Harvard University pay $1 billion to restore federal funding. Trump alleges anti-Semitism at the school and wants to withhold research money. He's also suggesting Harvard should face a criminal probe, but has not provided details as to why. A judge's order is blocking the effort, and the Trump administration is appealing. The Education Department says negotiations with Harvard are ongoing. The university is refusing to pay a cash settlement, according to the Harvard Crimson. Trump is dismissing a potential agreement that would involve funding trade schools. Russia launched its biggest missile and drone attack this year in the overnight hours, ending a brief pause agreed to by Moscow and Washington. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the attack involved 70 missiles and 450 drones targeting energy facilities across 6 regions. Zelensky saying in response to the attack, Russia chose terrorism over diplomacy. Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini joins us now from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. And Jason, walk us through, if you will, what happened overnight and really the scale of this attack.
Hi, Holly. I can tell you this was not your usual drone attack. Everyone heard the deep thud sounds of ballistic missiles making impact. We're talking wave after wave of rattling windows across the city all night long. By sunrise, from here where I'm standing, I could see smoke rising from multiple points on the horizon. Also, Kyiv's mayor announced this morning that emergency blackouts were being put into effect on the left bank of the Dnipro River, which is behind me. This was one of the largest barrages of the entire war. Over 500 missiles and drones, 32 of them ballistic missiles. Russia also fired 2 Zircon hypersonic missiles from occupied Crimea, and these Zircons are anti-ship missiles that Russia has repurposed for land attack, designed to penetrate Western naval defenses at Mach 8, Mach 9 speeds that really turned physics into a weapon. Ukrainian air defenses couldn't touch them. The targets: thermal power plants, generation facilities, the infrastructure that keeps people alive when it's minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit here. In this city alone, more than 1,100 apartment buildings lost heat. In Kharkiv, they're actually draining the heating system in 820 buildings, and they're doing that to keep the pipes from freezing and bursting. It basically renders those buildings uninhabitable. This is the 9th massive attack on Ukraine's largest energy company since October. And this is not the 9th attack, the 9th massive attack. And at least 9 people were injured in this one. Ukraine's air defenses intercepted most of what Russia launched, but we understand not the Zircons. And what got through did exactly what Moscow intended, Holly.
And this attack comes just as the so-called energy truce expires and peace talks are set to resume tomorrow. So what does this timing tell us about Russia's approach to these upcoming negotiations?
The timing, frankly, is breathtaking. Trump personally asked Putin in late January to pause strikes on Ukraine's energy grid for 1 week as a humanitarian gesture because of the extreme cold. Putin agreed to that, and the Kremlin confirmed it. The pause expired on Sunday. Russia used that week to stockpile missiles and then waited for the temperature to drop to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And so now you've got peace talks resuming tomorrow in Abu Dhabi. This is the second round of trilateral negotiations, U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. The central issue is territory in the Donbass. Russia demanding that Ukraine withdraw from the 20% that it still controls. Holly?
Happening as NATO Secretary Mark Rutte arrives in Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky. So what do we expect is on his agenda, and will that have any influence, do you think, on these potential peace agreements or peace talks?
Well, the agenda was driven by what happened overnight. Zelensky just posted on X that Russia used around 70 missiles of various types that approach the target, as he puts it, on a ballistic trajectory, and they can only be intercepted by Patriot missiles. This means, and I'm quoting from him here, this means that missiles for these systems are needed and the deliveries must be prompt. And that's a pretty alarming thing to be hearing from Ukraine's president. The urgent need for Patriot missiles seems to suggest, and there's been no confirmation of this, that supplies, they may be running low. Holly?
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
The entire world of Epstein was about other men. It wasn't about himself with 1,200 victims. It was about how he groomed and manipulated girls and passed them along to other men.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. All right, let's return to our briefing of today's top stories.
The Justice Department now says that it has removed thousands of documents from its website containing files related to the late Jeffrey Epstein. The names of survivors, their personal information, photos, and even more were included in those documents that were released last Friday. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller, live in New York City. Alex, this redaction issue is now moving into the courts. What are they saying?
Well, we will be inside of a federal courtroom tomorrow morning here in Manhattan. That will be the judge in the Epstein case will have a hearing of sorts. He said he didn't know how helpful he could be, but that he wanted to hear out these sides. He understands that this is a very timely case, and he recognizes the seriousness and the gravity of it. Essentially, the lawyers for the survivors wrote the judge a lengthy, meaty 5-page letter talking about all the errors they believe the Justice Department has made in publicizing the names of these survivors. Now, they want a few things done. I want to talk to you about it. They made some demands at the end of this letter. They say that they want an immediate takedown of the entire DOJ website that is hosting these Epstein materials. So we would not have access to that website. Then they want a comprehensive name-based search of all of the documents using the victim list. They want a special master appointed. That's something that they've already tried to do with the Ghislaine Maxwell judge, and they did not have luck with that there. And then they also want to reserve the right to sue and have contempt and sanctions proceedings as well. They're very concerned about the names, the multiple names of these survivors. Now, the DOJ, Dell, is blaming it on various factors, including technical and human error.
So, Alex, lawyers for survivors say they don't think this was innocent, and in fact, they're alleging egregious wrongdoing. How do they break down what happened with this release?
You know, I just spoke with the survivor as well, by the way, and she agreed. She thinks that this was done on purpose to particular survivors. Now, this is a scathing letter, again, that they wrote to these judges saying that this is an unfolding emergency that have affected has happened over thousands of instances, and repeated representations happened of that these redactions were the sole reason. Remember, they said that the reason that we didn't get these files on December 19th was because they needed to have careful redactions. And now we have more than 100 survivors, according to this letter, that were named in this. And again, they were not named in the same capacity, every single one of them. Some of them had their bank information put out. Some of them had a very private information put out as well. And they say that they are actively harming. I want to read you this one quote where they say their letters bear no resemblance to what has actually occurred. There is no conceivable degree of institutional incompetence sufficient to explain the scale, consistency, and persistence of the failures that occurred, particularly where the sole task ordered by the court and repeatedly emphasized by the DOJ was simple: redact known victims' names for publication. They said essentially all they needed to do, Dell, was type into the search function that is on the DOJ website the names of all of the survivors that had given their names that said that they did not want to be named. All you had to do is put each name in, and then you would see if names popped up, and if names popped up, then they could just take those files down, redact them, and put them back up. But for some reason, they say that was not done. Now let's go through some of the things that they say was listed in these files. A minor victim had her name revealed 20 times in a single document. Then when they fixed it, it was only redacted 3 times. There was a list of 31 minor child victims. 31 of them, 31 of 32 names were left visible. full first names and last names, their bank information, driver's licenses, email addresses, and home addresses, not to mention these unredacted photos, some of them which were nude photos. And there were these 4 women that they specifically mentioned, not by name, but had been very concerned about privacy concerns, and that had been in what they call near constant communication with the Department of Justice since December to make sure that their names would not be in these files. All 4 of their names, according to this letter, were in these files. So they also contend, Del, that they have not made it easy for the victims to get in touch with the Department of Justice, saying that they are being asked to send explicit links and give, they're the ones that are asked to put all this information out there essentially on a silver platter to get it redacted. Now the DOJ says that they're working to do so, but they're very unhappy, these survivors, with the effort by the DOJ and obviously what they did in the first place.
Alex, fascinating that there are 31 minor victims, and yet DOJ is saying nothing to see here. No one else will be charged. I'm curious, what are the survivors saying?
You know, I just spoke with survivor Lisa Phillips about her experiences, her reaction to all of this. She says it's been an incredibly rough few days, that she's had this nervousness and anxiety that she hasn't had in quite some time, and that she watched that press conference on Friday with Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, who was the one left there to speak instead of the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and that she's really frustrated, particularly at the part where he mentions that there's no men for them to prosecute. Listen to what she told me just a couple of minutes ago.
When Todd Blanche mentioned that there were no other men involved, it just literally made my whole body shake, because everybody knows, especially the survivors know, that the entire world of Epstein was about other men. It wasn't about himself with 1,200 victims. It was about how he groomed and manipulated girls and passed them along to other men. He was a trafficking king, and he was a master manipulator.
Now, Lisa Phillips says that her name was not in there in the way that, some of these survivors who didn't want to be named, theirs were, but she says she has friends that had their names outed, particularly ones who had not come forward before, and they're very concerned for their safety. In that letter to the judge that kind of kicked off this whole court case that we're going to see tomorrow, they gave some examples of what's happening to victims. And there's a list of a number of Jane Does in there that have had, threats already. I want to read you just one of them that talks about her experiences. She says it's been 24 hours and she's already getting death threats and nothing is being done. This one had her private banking info released, and she says, I'm now trying to shut down cards and accounts. This kind of vicious attack on a victim at the hands of the Department of Justice is an abomination, and her sentiments are echoed multiple times over in this letter. And as we've seen from the survivors as a whole, there are more than 1,000 survivors, and most of them did not want their names out there.
Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live for us in New York City. Alex, thank you very much.
Just ahead on Today's It Happened.
A federal judge blocking the Trump administration's move to end protections for hundreds of thousands of Haitian immigrants in the U.S., but uncertainty remains. I'm Katie Tubman. Coming up, why families are still bracing for a fight and how one woman made the painful decision to leave everything behind.
Glad you're back with Today's It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's continue our walkthrough of the day's top headlines.
Yes, temporary protected status for more than 350,000 Haitian immigrants was set to end today. That was until a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's plans to terminate that program. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman is live in New York now with the latest on this story. And Katie, it sounds like hundreds of thousands of Haitians can breathe a sigh of relief, but is it only temporary?
Well, that's the feeling right now, Adele. As you said, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration from terminating protective status, and that's legal status that grants hundreds of thousands of Haitian immigrants in the United States possibility to work and live without fearing deportation or detention. And that looks like it's postponed for now, that termination, giving very much a celebration that feels cautious and temporary with the administration's ongoing immigration crackdown. And so right now, the future remains shaky, and we spoke to one young woman who decided that it was best to leave everything behind before the government changes its mind.
I'm making the best out of a terrible situation. Whitney asked that we only identify her by her first name to protect her family. Since fleeing Haiti with temporary protected status after the 2010 earthquake, Whitney made a life in the U.S., attending high school and college here and going on to a career in marketing.
I came to America, and in the American dream, I felt like I was working towards that.
But with that dream upended, she made a drastic decision to voluntarily leave the United States. This is video she shared with us of her at the airport, headed for Mexico. Her departure meant leaving behind her mother, who was still in the U.S. on TPS, and her younger brothers, who are U.S. citizens.
Even on TPS, I'm scared, you know? So I didn't want to do anything to amplify this fear, personally, for me. I felt like I had more to gain by leaving than staying.
Still, she fears for her family, with TPS for Haitians caught up in a battle between the Trump administration and the courts.
They might have to go to Haiti, and it's not going to be it's not going to be good for them.
While the U.S. government says that Haiti no longer meets the conditions for the designation for temporary protected status, the country remains in deep turmoil, consumed by gang violence, political unrest, and widespread food insecurity, leaving families like Whitney's with few options.
They are giving those families a non-choice.
Curleen Joseph, a Haitian American human rights advocate.
You either deport yourself, you get deported, you deport yourself with your children, or you stay here and not knowing what's going to happen.
Whitney, who now holds a visa and temporary residency card in Mexico, hopes to return to the U.S. one day.
I don't have a choice but to look for it. And when I come back, I hope that I am welcomed with open arms.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
It provides very common sense measures for voting in our country, such as voter ID.
Scripps News is streaming for free on all your favorite streaming services. Once you get the app, get free access to breaking news, live events, and the award-winning journalism you expect from Scripps News. Start streaming Scripps News today.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. So why don't we pick up right where we left off?
Let's go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue right now. President Trump is meeting with Colombian President Gustavo Petro at the White House. Trump and Petro have publicly traded barbs over the White House immigration policy, the efforts to stop drug trafficking, and, of course, last month's ouster of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. This is the first time the two men have met in person. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull is live right now on the North Lawn. And, Haley, what do we know about how the meeting went?
Yeah, Del, that meeting wrapped, appearing to last for more than an hour. And ahead of it, the White House describing President Trump as in a positive headspace about the meeting. We are waiting to see if that same tone remains following it. Now, this was not a meeting that was taking place in front of the press, but we are getting glimpses into it through photos published from each respective government. The Colombian government showing some more jovial toned photos, the two leaders appearing to lean in towards each other, while the White House releasing photos showing the two engaged in discussions. Now, the stakes for this meeting were significant, as President Trump has, over the course of this term, issued warnings for Colombian President Petro amidst his focus on the Western Hemisphere and more specifically countering drug trafficking. And as the Colombian government headed into this meeting, suggesting it was looking to strike economic and counter-narcotic deals. But the relationship, as you alluded to, has had tensions. The U.S. in this administration has stopped payments to Colombia, issued sanctions, and verbally sparred with the Colombian president. President Trump has accused Petro of producing cocaine, called him a lunatic, a bad guy, hostile, and has warned him to wise up and watch it or face serious action. On the flip side of that, Petro is certainly not someone who has been reserved in his public comments. The Colombian leader has spoken out against the capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, against U.S. strikes against alleged drug trafficking boats, and over the past year called President Trump driven by a thirst for political power, arrogant, while denying any narcotic ties. But we saw that tone shift following a call between the leaders earlier this month. The President Trump, saying that they had a good talk and had agreed to meet. And Trump this week suggesting that Petro's tone changed after the United States capture of Nicolas Maduro, telling reporters this ahead of today's meeting.
I mean, he's been very nice over the last month or two. He was certainly critical before that, but somehow after the Venezuelan raid, he became very nice. He changed his attitude very much.
And notably, Del, one of the things we have seen the Colombian government try to highlight in their public statements leading up to this meeting was efforts to seize drugs and operations against what they call illegal armed groups. But again, what this relationship looks like coming out of this meeting is something that we are closely watching. This is the first leader the president has hosted at the White House this second year of his second term, Del.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Beaufort live on the North Lawn. Haley, thank you very much. Right now, the mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie still missing. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano saying Guthrie was taken forcibly from her home, says they are looking into whether this was a targeted attack involving Nancy Guthrie. The health of the 84-year-old is a major concern. The sheriff saying she could die without her medication. Nancy Guthrie was last seen Saturday night. Bill and Hillary Clinton have agreed to appear in person for depositions in Washington as part of the congressional probe into Jeffrey Epstein. The last-minute offer coming as the House was preparing to vote on holding the former president and the former Secretary of State in contempt of Congress. Clinton, like a number of other high-profile men, including President Trump, had a well-documented relationship with Epstein in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He has not been accused of any wrongdoing in his interactions with Epstein. A U.S. Navy fighter jet shooting down an Iranian drone that, according to U.S. Central Command, the military saying the drone, quote, aggressively approached the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, says its intent was unclear. Central Command says the drone kept coming towards the ship even as U.S. forces deployed escalatory measures. President Trump once again falsely stating that the 2020 election was stolen. He's now pushing to nationalize elections and not just a federal takeover. He wants his party, the Republican Party, to do this.
And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win. Now you're going to see something in Georgia where they were able to get, with a court order, the ballots. You're going to see some interesting things come out.
He referenced Georgia. Once again, you may recall that he lost that state to Joe Biden in 2020, and that despite his allegation of fraud, Georgia, in particular Fulton County, Georgia, election results have been investigated and prodded a number of times and came out clean. Last week, the FBI raided the county's election headquarters, taking pallets of ballots, 700 boxes in all. Officials there saying this search now made sense and that they are alarmed that now that the feds have the ballots, they can't guarantee that it is the integrity moving forward. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Andrew Rafferty joins us now. And Raf, the president was asked about this yesterday, and it's one of those, did he really say that moment? The president essentially says, yep, I did. But the Constitution is abundantly clear. It's not the federal government. It is the states that control elections.
Yeah, and Del, we can start with a little bit of a lesson here in civics and government, maybe take you back to high school a little bit, just to remind people specifically what the Constitution says. It's pretty explicit in placing these powers with the states. The times, places, manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. By the Congress may at any time by the law make or alter such regulation except as the place of choosing senators. That's all to translate to say, the president, this is none of your business. This is up to the states themselves. This is not a federal issue. But the reason this has, I think, drawn so much attention is because it is, as you kind of pointed out there, part of a long-running sort of crusade by the president to talk not only about the 2020 election, but also the 2026, maybe 2028 elections. And there's been plenty of policy and movement behind the scenes to sort of back up what he has said publicly. The Department of Justice has essentially asked for the voter rolls of every state. Right now, according to the Brennan Center, there is 11 states that have complied. No surprise, perhaps, that they're all Republican-led states. 24 are being sued. And, oh, by the way, this all comes as we've seen these special elections where Republicans, even in deep red parts of the country, are getting largely walloped by Democrats right now. There's a lot of momentum behind these Democratic candidates. So let's play for our viewers Caroline Levitt. She spoke just a few moments ago trying to clean up what the president said yesterday. Let's take a listen.
It provides very common sense measures for voting in our country, such as voter ID. I don't think any rational person who's being honest with themselves would disagree with the idea of requiring citizens of this country to present an ID before casting a ballot in a federal election, or frankly in any election. And that's something the president wants to see happen. So that's what he was referring to.
Okay, so she's trying to say that he wasn't necessarily saying that the White House needs to take these over. Specifically that they should pass this thing called the SAVE Act, which is coming up in Congress a couple times, and I'm sure is going to again, which essentially requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. Opponents of that say you already got to be a citizen to vote in this country.
Two things of note. The person in charge of the Fulton County election saying that no one complained in 2024 when Donald Trump won the election, so he's saying that was free and fair, just 2020. And also, the president says the Republicans should take over 15 states. And those states very likely to be democratically led.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten a lot of clarity of what 15 states specifically he was talking about. We know that there's a number of states that he was not successful in the battlegrounds in 2020, that he has been laser focused on for the past 5 or so years. But it is worth just taking a step back and looking at some of the states that have gone through the process of auditing their voter rolls, their election results, and largely finding that no, there's really no problem with non-citizen voting. We can talk about Georgia, which has gotten so much attention. In 2024, they went back and looked and found that the 8.2 million voters who have registered, 20 were non-citizens. And again, we're just talking about voters being registered. Actually, all 20 of those did not even vote. I think the final was 9. And then there is this ongoing national review that has been ordered by the Trump administration. The New York Times had some recent reporting that out of the 49.5 million voters that between the DOJ and Department of Homeland Security have looked at, 10,000 have been essentially passed along for further review. Again, we don't know what that even means, if these folks are registered to vote, if they actually voted, but we are talking about, I think the math there is 0.02%. But it's gotten a lot of attention, obviously, on Capitol Hill. Mark Warner today wants to know more about why Tulsi Gabbard specifically was in those election offices, talking about how she took a phone call from Donald Trump and played and allowed him to talk to the FBI agents on the ground there. So I imagine that we are going to see Tulsi Gabbard on Capitol Hill in the not too near future, asking a lot of questions about, or having to answer a lot of questions about what she was doing in Georgia.
Again, they got it right in 2024. It's amazing how that happens.
Fixed it.
Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty. Raph, thank you very much.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
On this vote, the yeas are 217 and nays are 214. Without objection, the motion is adopted.
You're watching Scripps News.
Thanks for joining us again on Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer here with your daily look at the day's top stories.
Following breaking news from Capitol Hill, the House just passing that bill to end the partial government shutdown, sending the measure to President Trump. Go on the scene right now to Capitol Hill. Our congressional correspondent, Nathaniel Reed, is there. Nate, I guess the good news is the government is back open for business soon. The bad news is it's the IRS, too.
Well, Del, I won't speak for your own tax needs or issues, but yes, the full government will be reopened as soon as President Trump signs this bill. The problem is that this bill only funds the Department of Homeland Security for 2 weeks while lawmakers work out a more comprehensive solution and guardrails for ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a division of the Department of Homeland Security. That is why this bill only agrees to fund that department for the next 2 weeks. The goal here from Democrats who've made demands is to put in place a number of reforms, everything from banning the use of masks, requiring body cameras, requiring identification, requiring the use of warrants, and banning roving patrols by officers to try and prevent incidents like the ones that we've seen in Minneapolis in recent weeks. The big question is whether a bipartisan group of lawmakers would be willing to agree to those reforms. This was already an incredibly tight vote on the House floor. A number of Republicans voted against this funding package. A number of Democrats, a large number of Democrats voted against. Only 21 Democrats voted in favor of passing this multiple bill package to fund large portions of the government. I just want to give you some of the highlights here, Del, for this latest funding bill. For one, Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Labor, that is fully funded for the rest of the fiscal year. We will see a delayed fiscal report, not expected anymore at the end of this week as a result of this partial government shutdown, but now they are fully funded through the end of the fiscal year. Also funding for air traffic controllers. That's now approved through the end of September, so that's not something we have to worry about anymore. The biggest concern, though, is going to be the Department of Homeland Security, simply because lawmakers really only have 10 days before we're in yet another partial government shutdown as a result of this desire to have these negotiations to try and rework what that department is able to do. Those negotiations, we understand, are between Senate Democrats and President Donald Trump. A lot of questions, though, about whether House Democrats and a lot of Republicans here on Capitol Hill are going to agree with what those negotiations yield, and furthermore, whether they can even yield anything. Democrats appear to have no issue with the possibility of a long funding lapse, a long shutdown for the Department of Homeland Security, especially because the Department of Homeland Security does not need funding to continue to conduct ICE enforcement. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has its own pocket of funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed last year, the Republican-only reconciliation plan. So the reality here is, Del, this is just a very, very short delay for what's expected to be yet another funding battle in just 10 days' time for funding for the Department of Homeland Security. And whether negotiators are able to reach agreement in that 10 days, that remains a very open and very unclear question.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed live on Capitol Hill. Nate, in case anybody asks, by the way, I love the IRS. Just putting that on the record out there. Nate Reed on Capitol Hill, of course.
We will be back in just a moment as we continue to track today's top news.
And I think holding up one little page doesn't do it justice. In there, it's a lot of stuff, but it's signed. Thank you.
You're watching Today's It Happened, Scripps News recap of the day's biggest event. So let's dive right in.
Brothers of Renee Good speaking with lawmakers at a forum. Luke and Brett Ganger appearing before that group. Renee Good, of course, being the 37-year-old mother of three who was shot and killed in Minneapolis 2 weeks ago. Take a listen.
The most important thing we can do today is to help this panel and our country understand who Renee is and what a beautiful American we have lost. A sister, a daughter, mother, a partner, and a friend.
When I think of Renee, I think of dandelions and sunlight. Dandelions don't ask permission to grow. They push through cracks in the sidewalk, through hard soil, through places where you don't expect beauty, and suddenly there they are, bright, alive. Unapologetically hopeful. That was Renee. And sunlight, warm, steady, life-giving, because when she walked in a room, things felt lighter, even on cloudy days.
That is Luke and Brett Ganger testifying on Capitol Hill, a forum, if you will, not a congressional hearing, saying to those gathered the most important thing they could do was to let the panel and the world know who their sister was. They said a sister, a daughter, a mother, a partner, and a friend. Scripps News investigative correspondent Patrick Terpstra has been to Minnesota on the ground covering the shooting. And Patrick, if you will, you could see the emotions there in that room. There was a particular moment there where Senator Amy Klobuchar was looking on, and you could tell she was almost teared up. Describe, if you will, the emotions that you saw and how raw it still is in Minnesota over the killings, not only of Renee Good, but also of Alex.
Well, I was going to say, particularly those two brothers. I mean, these are people that lost a sister just a couple weeks ago, and you really have to think that it is still so raw for them. You saw that second brother talking there, really tearing up, describing her, Renee Good, as a dandelion, someone that no matter what, she was going to have her presence known and was a light. And he said that if she couldn't find the light in a situation, well, then she would make the light for someone else. Really difficult, you can tell, for him to be talking there. The other brother also said something I think was so interesting, saying that they had been waiting now to see things change because of the killing of Renee Good. And he said that so far, things haven't changed.
You were watching the news conference from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He was talking not only about Renee Good, he was also talking about Alex Petri. And basically what he was saying is that nothing has changed. And he says that he believes that this is an occupation and that it is done on purpose for political reasons. And for that reason, he does not think things are changing.
Yeah, and you get the sense that his patience maybe is wearing a little bit thin. When we were on the ground last week in Minneapolis, the governor said that he had had really productive conversations with the federal government and that the Trump administration also, through Tom Homan, the border czar, saying that they too could see perhaps even drawing down some of the enforcement actions that would be going on. 3,000 federal agents on the street right now, and the governor today saying that he would like to see that be reduced to just a few hundred, but that hasn't happened yet. And he points to the fact that they're still seeing children detained. These are children that are detained with their parents who get arrested. But he said this has been just hugely disruptive to his state of Minnesota. You think about those children that have been taken into custody and what that's meant for them. And we're talking about not just that Liam Ramos, that 5-year-old that people remember seeing there in the oversized winter hat, but 4 other children just from that school district alone that have been taken into custody and then flown to Texas. So still a lot of opposition coming from the governor there in Minnesota. But on the Trump side of things, we heard just today Republicans talking on Capitol Hill saying that they still stand by what ICE is doing.
What's fascinating is, and you can speak to this because you have covered this immigration story almost from the beginning, before they moved into Minnesota. I have never seen judges' rulings with regards to being angry about what is happening at detention centers, being angry about what is happening on the ground, and using very pointed language, almost going so far as to say that they are using children as a way to basically boost numbers of people that are being deported, even if it is a 5-year-old little boy.
Yeah, and the judge in that case of the 5-year-old boy, he actually, when he signed the court order mandating his release, actually included a photograph, that iconic photograph of the 5-year-old wearing that hat, and 2 Bible verses underneath the photograph saying Jesus wept. So it is these judges who are speaking out from the bench and pushing back along with these state and local leaders. But at the same time, you do have the Trump administration saying that they have every right to go and do this, and that these are people, the word they use is impeding. So we're hearing from people later on in this forum. There's a woman who was shot 5 times by agents in Chicago, and also the lady dragged out of her car. ICE, they're not at this forum, but what they will tell you is that these are people that were impeding their operations. They had no business to be there. They were tracking ICE agents. So you still have this debate going on about exactly what ICE and Customs and Border Patrol should be allowed to do on the ground, and I don't know that we have an answer to that.
Final question before I let you go, which is that the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, says that you can't use racial profiling to basically pick people up. But in Minnesota, do they believe that this is a case of racial profiling on the part of Immigration and Customs Enforcement?
There are a lot of people in Minnesota that do believe that if you have a certain pigment in your skin, you are more likely to be pulled over, stopped by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The Trump administration, you ask them about that, are you racially profiling? They say absolutely not. But it's another one of these cases where people on the ground in Minnesota say they are believing what they are seeing, not what they're being told.
Our investigative correspondent, Patrick Terpstra.
We thank you for spending part of your evening here with Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a wonderful Tuesday night.